Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Mind the Music podcast. This is the second podcast. In the last podcast, we talked about everything to do with the Ghost God series of songs. So basically why I was so obsessed with Ghost God, because I ended up doing loads and loads of tracks based off of Ghost God and Scrap Freak, and it was just talking about what the purpose of that obsession was, where it came from. In this podcast, I'm going to be talking about what is a collab, why we do it, does it really help with our exposure, and I'm going to be going over all of the collaborations that I've done or other people have done with me over the course of my music career. So if you're not aware of what a collaboration is, I'm sure the majority of people know what a collaboration is, but if you're not entirely certain, a collaboration is basically just where two or more people work together on a piece of music, right? So when I'm talking about collaborations, I'm talking about the tracks that I've done with other people, the tracks that I've worked on musically with other people, but also vocals that I've provided to other people, vocals that other people have provided in my tracks, and also other people remixing my tracks. And then we have to sometimes ask ourselves, why do we actually make collaborations, right? Well, there's a number of reasons, and I'm sure you can all agree that it's particularly enjoyable to make collaborations with people. It's so much fun to be able to collab with people. It's a lot more fun to collab than to make music alone, right? It also means that both sides can get a lot of exposure. So when you're making music alone, the only person who's able to get exposure is you, right? So you will be sharing your music along with other people that you have to kind of almost force to share your music. Your loyal fans will share your music without you having to tell them to, but you kind of have to nudge people a little bit and say, hey, do you mind helping me out? But when it comes to collaboration, both you and the people that you're collaborating with will share the music, which will most definitely improve its exposure. So in general, to answer the question of do collaborations help with your exposure? Yes, they do, because multiple people definitely sharing your track is going to massively improve your exposure compared to just you and some of your loyal fans promoting your track. And that's generally my experience when it comes to collaborations. All of my collaborations have done a lot better than my original tracks because they've been a lot easier to promote. Also, in general, collaborated tracks just tend to turn out a lot better than original tracks because it's good to get opinions from both people to say you like this or you disagree with this, and to be able to blend a mixture of both of your styles. The track generally turns out a lot better because there's a difference in what you both view as good quality. Now, the first track that I did, which was a collab track, was called Sympathy, and it was with an artist called Vivant. He may have changed his name a couple of times, I'm not sure, but at the time his name was Vivant, right? So this was the first collab track that I ever did, and the genre of this track is generally considered as chill step. Now, at the time I wasn't really sure what this was, and if you're not sure what chill step is, it's similar to dubstep. That's why it's got the step at the end, but unlike dubstep tracks, which are normally very gritty, very heavy, and very aggressive to listen to, the sort of tracks that you wouldn't really listen to your grandparents with, chill step is a lot more melodic. Chill step is a lot more melodic and a lot more, I wouldn't say energetic, but I would say a lot more emotionally rich. That's probably a good word to describe it. It's the sort of stuff that you would be more inclined to listen to your grandparents with, because it's just generally a lot nicer to the ear. Now, the biggest problem with this track was that this was a very, very bad work ratio between us. Normally, when you make collab tracks with somebody, you want to split the workload between the two people so it's 50-50, or if it's more than two people, you want to split it evenly as much as you can, especially when you're working together with somebody who's not doing vocals. They're actually working on the samples in the track with you. But with this track, all that Vivant provided was the vocal sample that you hear, the vocoded vocal sample, and a build-up sound just before the drop that wasn't actually in time with the track. If you listen to it very carefully, it sounds very stretched because I had to stretch it so it was in time, so it doesn't sound the way it should do, basically. But luckily, I don't think the majority of people would notice that. So I had to do everything else after that. So he only provided 2 samples. Everything else, including all the artwork, the mastering, and all the promotion, was just done by me. So it wasn't the best track in the world, but I did actually enjoy the mix overall. It had very big energy, was very enjoyable to do. I think one of the biggest problems as well was the communication. So when it comes to collaborating with people that you don't know, you still need to communicate very, very efficiently. You need to constantly message back and forth saying, or kind of showing like little snippets of the track that you're working on, or just the track in its entirety, right? And you have to both comment on what you like and what you don't like, what you think needs to be added or taken away based on your own opinions, right? And that has to be done very frequently. It's the same thing with software development, right? So when you're developing software, for example, for a client, you have to frequently get in contact with the client to make sure that they like the software and that you can make changes as quickly and as efficiently as possible. It's no different to music production, right? You have to very frequently message each other to make sure that things are just going as they should be, and that you both agree on the current sound, right? And so when it is finished, you both like it, basically. You don't just work on the whole track and then hope by the end of it that you're both going to enjoy it, when actually, in reality, only one of you enjoys it. So in total, I probably give this track a 6 out of 10, right? Because as much as I did enjoy doing the track, it could have been a lot better in terms of actual collaboration, in terms of actual workload. It was a very short track, it was very simple, and being the first collab track, it's definitely not one of the best, but it was still enjoyable to do, and I still definitely rate it to this day. Now, the next collab track that I did was called Two Player, and this track was with a guy called Rebel Scum. At the time, he was called Rebel Scum, but now he calls himself Flo. That is what he's currently called. I've worked with him a number of times, but basically we both met on a Discord server called the Miscat Squad Discord server. I've mentioned Miscat Squad a number of times in my past videos, right? Basically, it was a YouTuber who is now a group of YouTubers. I think the channel is now called All Ages of Geek, and they have a new Discord server because the old one got taken down due to suspicions of hacking and stalking or something like that. I'm not 100% sure on the details. You're welcome to go and research. But basically, we both met on that server. He found out that I was an artist. We got talking, and he basically said one day, "Can I work on you with a track?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So what he did was he sent me a drum beat. So half of the drum beat was an electronic drum beat, and the other half was just a normal sort of acoustic drum beat. And I thought, okay, I can definitely work with this. So I decided to kind of experiment with loads of different synths that I can put on top of it. So I experimented with like a growly, like a bit crushed aggressive synth. I was going for like really not dramatic, but sort of energetic and kind of upbeat sort of modern synth styles, with some other things like string stabs and like bit crushed marimba sounds, for example. And I think in general it worked quite well. There was actually a rendering error when I gave it to him, so he uploaded the track to his channel because it didn't really fit my style very well. So I thought I'll give that to him just so he can have a bit more exposure there. Plus, that's another way to get you more exposure if you have your music on other people's channels as well. But there was a bit of a problem there. So it's okay though, it wasn't the sort of thing that most people noticed. It was a very basic track. Because all he provided me was the beat and I provided a few synths on top, it could have been a lot bigger, but it was okay, right? In general, I would probably give this a 5 out of 10. I know he's probably not going to agree with that, but I'm sure we can both agree that it was very simple, and as much as it has a lot of energy and it was kind of enjoyable, right, it could have been a lot bigger and it could have been a lot better. It definitely wasn't entirely my style because I ended up having to try and add my own style to it, right, but it was okay, right? It could definitely have been a lot better, a lot bigger, right, and a lot more professionally produced on my end, but it was okay. So the next track that I worked on was with a guy called Matt Vassie, and it was a house track called Altered Hype. And this was a very basic one again. I basically only provided the kick, the ride, and also a synth shot at the beginning. And that's literally it. He did the rest of the track. I mastered it though, so I pushed it to what it needed to be. So I can't really comment that much on it because it wasn't really my track to say. So when I'm talking about the right balance, right, I don't really consider tracks to be collaborations if they are of a certain imbalance. So for example, let's say one person only did like 5% of the work, right, and the other person did like 95%. That's not really a collaboration. That's almost just them giving a comment on the track whilst you did literally everything else. So you wouldn't really consider that a collaboration. But in terms of the track that I did with him, when all I did was provide the kick, the ride, and just a little bit of like synth information into that track, it's still considered a collab, even though it wasn't really one of those things that we both worked very hard on. So I would probably give that track a 6 out of 10, even though it wasn't really my track at all. I think it actually wasn't that bad, it was mixed pretty well in general. So the next collab track that was to do with me was the Rush Dragon Tree remix, which was actually the first remix that somebody had did of one of my tracks, which I was super happy with, right? It was very, very enjoyable back, listening to that back in first year, listening to somebody else remixing one of my tracks for the first time. I was actually dancing quite a lot to that when he was sending me samples. Again, communication was very important with that, and we were sending samples, or he was sending samples to me quite a lot. I wasn't really asking for many changes with that track because it was actually just pretty good in general. He was just kind of sending me little updates of the track just to see like what I thought of it. But the biggest problem with this track was on my end, I did not send him the stems. I only sent him the finished audio of Rush, which was a very bad idea. So basically when you work on collab tracks, you want to send the other artist the stems of your track, which is basically all of the samples in your projects separated by tracks. Okay, so all of your projects will have loads of different tracks, and each track will have a number of different samples, be it normal like WAV or MP3 samples, or there'll be MIDI samples which also get converted to stems, right? They get converted to just normal sound samples basically. So that's what you want to do, and this is what I did later on, but right now I didn't know how to do that, and I didn't realise it was that important for collaborations when it actually is. I just sent him the finished file of Rush, right? So there was only so much he could work with, okay? So it just wasn't a very good idea. It massively limited what he could have done and made it sound a lot less like Rush. So when you first listen to it, you might not recognise that it's Rush until the first breakdown. The sound was really big, it was really enjoyable to listen to, and it was definitely a great switch up from my usual style. I think the balance of certain things in the mix could have been a bit better. I think he tends to make his music a bit too loud in comparison, but overall I'd probably give that track a 7 out of 10 because I genuinely thought it was actually really decent at the time. So the next collab track that I worked on was called Keep Up, and this featured another artist called Steven Zippe, a singer. And this is probably the first track that I did that featured somebody else's vocals in one of my pieces of work. It was a very, very enjoyable sound to listen to. The synths were great. His vocals fit really nicely in the track. He enjoyed it as well. His samples were clean as well. And in general, the track was well mixed. Unfortunately, it was well mixed, but it wasn't as loud as it could have been. So when I was doing the track, I thought it was fine. I was trying to push it as much as I could have, but I couldn't get it any louder than what it was without distortion, right? Because that's what happens when you push a track a bit too much, either through compression or limiting, then sometimes the track will distort, which is obviously a huge problem. You do not want a track to distort because that just ruins everything. So I kept it as it was, nice and quiet, nice and limited. But I didn't realise how quiet it was until I compared it to some of my other tracks and realised, oh wow, this is actually really quiet. I have to turn this track up specifically whenever I want to listen to it, and then when I listen to my other stuff, I now have to turn my volume down, which you shouldn't have to do because all of your tracks should be at the same level of loudness, okay? So that was a bit of an error on my part, but it did really well on the YouTube channel because we both were promoting it quite a lot. He was sharing it with his friends, a lot of his friends, and they were sharing it with their friends, and they didn't think it was the best track in the world, but they really enjoyed it in general. So yeah, that definitely boosted the views on the channel, so I'm definitely not complaining about that. And just in general, it was a great track. It just worked so well, and I still enjoy listening to it a lot to this day. I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10 to be honest, because it was just really good. The next track that I did, which was very shortly after, was called Chaos, and it was with a guy called Ain't, which is spelled EIGHN''T. Kind of an interesting name. Kind of caught me off guard trying to pronounce that the first time I saw it. But this was a really good track in terms of the workload, the way that we split the workload. This was the best 50-50 split in terms of samples. So basically what I mean by that is half of the samples were mine and half of the samples were his, right? So it was a good split, okay? That's kind of a rough estimation because it's not a perfect 50-50 split. It's impossible to get a perfect 50-50 split in terms of what you're working on, because it's really hard to define what a 50-50 split actually is, right? Because we both provided similar numbers of samples, right? But then you could ask yourself, which samples are more important than others, right? Is providing loads of kicks more important than providing loads of synths, for example? I don't know why I said loads of kicks, sorry. You just want a single kick. But hopefully you see what I mean. I provided all of the effects as well, but he most likely put some effects on his synths as well. And I also did the artwork, but we kind of spoke about the artwork. I was going through loads and loads of different iterations of the artwork until we both came across something that we really liked, which was the main text used for the word chaos. So I went through a lot of different pieces of text, and that was the last one. We both agreed that was good, and that was where we stopped. And yeah, it actually, ended up really well. I'd probably, in general, give that track a 7 out of 10 because it was well mixed. It wasn't as heavy as it could have been. It was meant to be like a deep house track, but it definitely could have been a lot more aggressive. I say deep house, I think I actually meant Electro-House. Also, this track highlighted the difficulty when it comes to using two different pieces of software. So basically, I use Mixcraft 8. I'm hoping to upgrade to Mixcraft 9 in the future, but he used a very, very popular music software called FL Studio, right? And the problem there is that both Mixcraft 8 and FL Studio have their own file formats. Mixcraft 8 uses a format called .mx8, so that's how you recognize it as a Mixcraft file, and that's how Mixcraft knows that it can open up this file. If I were to try and give Mixcraft an FL Studio file, it wouldn't open because they don't mix well. So the two file formats aren't compatible with each other. So so that's why if we both were working in FL Studio or Mixcraft 8, for example, we would both have the opportunity to share the entire project rather than just individual stems, which made the project a lot bulkier than what it should have been, but it still wasn't that bad. So the next collab track was somebody else's remix of Rush called Epic Hider. This was a guy who basically did the track really, really quickly. I think he managed to do it in about a day. Now, I know that's not impossible because I actually finished Ghost God within about a day. But this time I actually gave him the stems. Compared to the Rush remix where I just gave Dragon Tree a finished copy of the file, I actually gave Epic Hider the full stems of Rush, which meant he could mix it properly. And it was definitely mixed a lot better. The drop was kind of interesting. I didn't really expect it. The timing was a bit weird, but it was, in general, it was well mixed and it was enjoyable to listen to because it had a lot of good sounds in it. So I think that track would probably, for me, be a 6 out of 10. So the next track that we worked on was Empathy, right? And that was, again, with Flow. So this is when he changed his name to Flow, right? And this was definitely better than 2Player, in my opinion, right? This is also the first hip-hop collaboration that I did, right? So basically, I did vocals during the chorus. He did vocals in the chorus as well, but mine were a bit more prominent. I also did all the the instrumental, so I did the bass, the beats, the synths, the strings, and everything in between. And he primarily did the rapping during the verses. Okay. Now here's the thing with this track. The idea was good. It was a very interesting mix. It was almost angelic, if you like, but the rapping on his end could definitely have been a lot better. I think we can both agree that some work could have been done on the quality of the vocals. The fidelity of the vocals could also have been improved. And what I mean by that is the fidelity is basically the difference between a high quality WAV file and a low quality MP3 file. You'll notice that a lot of the audio seems to disappear almost because things sort of get cut out from a file to make it smaller. That's basically what fidelity is. It's a measure of the file's quality, inverted commas. When we talk about quality in music, we generally talk about how nice something sounds, how much we appreciate the sound that we're hearing because of what's in it or because of the genre, for example. That's quality to us, but fidelity talks more on a computer level, more of a file format level, to do with how much information is in the file and how good a quality it sounds based on the information that's there. That makes sense? So the way you can notice fidelity is if you listen to some very bright synths, for example. So if you listen to a really high quality audio file and listen to the synths, you will hear the harshness of the noise and the buzziness of the synths. But if you compare that to an MP3 file, for example, you won't hear that harshness because of the way the sampling is reduced, okay? So his vocal fidelity could definitely have been a bit better, but at the same time that is also a problem on my end because even with bad fidelity, it's my job to kind of patch that up and make it sound as best as possible, but having good fidelity on a track is the first step, right? You have to start with good fidelity, otherwise there's only so much I can do, if that makes sense. So yeah, that was the general issue. It was his vocal quality and his vocal fidelity, right? So he can't change the fidelity without getting a better microphone. The same goes for everybody with poor quality microphones. But in terms of vocals, like now, he's definitely improved his vocals, which I'm going to talk about later on as well in an upcoming track. And just in general, his rapping skill back then was not as good as what it is today, so I'm going to have to give that track a 6 out of 10. I did enjoy it to the point where I gave it an instrumental export, which was quite nice. That was used in, I think, one of my chill mega mixes, which you can go check out. But yeah, no, it wasn't that bad of a track, to be honest. It definitely had a nice vibe, and also that was put on his channel as well for the additional exposure. I rendered that again, slightly different to how I would normally render my stuff, but he did the artwork for that, so there was more of a collaborative effort there as well. Now, the next collab track that I did was one that I really enjoyed, and this was Crisis with Black Winter. This again was not a vocal collab, it was just a normal producer collab, adding our own samples. And this is probably one of my favourite tracks, actually, because even though it wasn't a particularly great split, because I only did the verse section and the mastering, whereas he did everything else, it was just, the mix in general was just really, really good. Like his style, when I first heard about him, was just great. It's the sort of thing I'm trying to aspire to get to, actually, because even though as an artist he's currently not doing as well as me, because he doesn't tend to promote as much stuff and he doesn't make as much material, his sound, because he has higher quality synths and programs, is a lot better, and he can definitely reach a more interested audience if you were to promote his stuff a lot more. It was just a really, really energetic track. The render for the video was really good as well. I did the artwork. We both agreed on the artwork. Again, there were a few changes there, which is why it's important to make that communication. But I'd probably give that track an 8 out of 10 because it was just a really, really enjoyable track to listen to. Okay, so the next track that I did with somebody was He Won't Talk, and that again was with Flo. But this time he wasn't rapping. Neither of us were rapping and neither of us were singing. This time we were just talking to each other, right? So this track was basically, I think it was the first lo-fi track that I did, which is actually the most popular track so far on Spotify. I think it's just recently hit 500 streams, so thanks everybody for that. However, it was definitely a lot different to my usual style, of course. I'm usually the kind of guy that makes EDM or house or even, like chill step, I guess. But this was the first time I kind of took it a bit easier and did a bit of lo-fi. Lo-fi in general is a lot easier to make because it's just a case of picking a sample or making a sample, processing it a bit, adding a beat, adding some other elements here and there like bass, strings, synths, etc. And then you're done pretty much. But this one was quite important actually because this track focused a lot more on a serious issue rather than just being a jumpy up and down EDM track with loads of energy, yeah, look how much fun we're having sort of style. This was a more serious whilst also being chilled out track because it focused a lot on depression. Because if you listen very carefully to the lyrics, it's basically us having a conversation in each ear. I'm basically trying to understand why he's not able to talk to me, right? It focuses on how people who suffer with depression are not able to open up to us. They're not able to tell us what's wrong. And it kind of confuses us because we're saying to them, you need to talk to us, otherwise we can't help you. We can't understand what you're going through, so we can't do anything about this, and it just leaves you in a worse position. But I would never be able to understand that because I personally have never experienced depression, and I guess I should count my blessings. But people who have, I understand they are not able to sort of open up to the wider audience about why they're depressed because they're afraid of the consequences, for example. But again, I would never understand that, and I just want people to open up about this sort of thing because otherwise we just can't help them. So this was a great track. I really enjoyed it. It was a great mix. A lot of people really enjoyed the mix. I definitely give this one an 8 out of 10. Really, really enjoyed this one. The next collab track that I did was a vocal edit of Sickness by a new artist called VP the Mac. So basically on Twitter, quite a long time ago, after I finished Sickness, I enjoyed the vocals of Sickness, but I wanted somebody to do a vocal cover of Sickness because I really enjoy the instrumental, but I thought somebody else could definitely put their own spin on this. So I publicly asked if anybody's able to provide vocals for my new track, so like a new instrumental, for example, and it was VP the Mac who basically gave me his he gave the first response and said I'd like to do it. So we chatted for a bit, and basically he took quite a while doing the vocals, but I have to give him credit for it because he actually did it professionally. He did it in a studio. He took the time to make sure it was done nice and cleanly, which I have to really respect. And it was also a really easy track to do because I could just take the instrumental from Sickness, literally just stick his vocals in it, process them a little bit, and then that was it. And the lyrics and the general style just worked really well with the track. He understood the general motif of the track, which is to do with it's called Sickness because it's basically producers like us, like myself, who are very small and struggle to reach a wider audience because people don't really care about us. It makes us feel ill almost. It makes us feel like we're in some kind of like containment unit where people can't really hear us. That's the main focus of the track. But his spin on it was actually really good, and I'm very tempted in the future to do an extended version of Sickness, which includes my vocals, but also VP's vocals as well mixed in. So I'd probably give that track a 7 out of 10. Sickness wasn't one of my best tracks. I think the artwork definitely could have been a lot better because it was a bit just a bit crap, to be honest. But no, his spin on it was just really good. The next collab track is we're almost at the end now, but the last collab track is probably one of my favourite tracks, and it is Forever, which was a track by Black Winter where I featured in it. So I did the vocals in that track. I didn't actually add any synths or anything like that. I didn't help produce it. I did master it, I think, towards the end. I did help master it, but I just did the vocals, and this was a lot better because the vocals I actually did in the studio at UEA, in the university that I'm going to at the moment, which gave it a much better spin. As I said, it's always important to make sure the fidelity is as good as it can be before you do any processing. So I also did some processing on the vocal, so I added my own reverb, and then he, tweaked that a little bit. And this is also the first time I had featured in somebody else's track, as in terms of vocals. So this was alone, that is, not like collaborating with somebody else, because now I've just realised I did vocals for Empathy, right, but that was with Flo. He primarily featured in that, right, whereas I'm kind of on the side doing the chorus. But when it comes to Forever, I'm the main vocal feature in that track, if that makes sense. So it was a very, very enjoyable track. A lot of people didn't really like the timing, and yes, the timing in that track, and the vocal timing was not as tight as it could have been because we had a few issues with that. But in general, I would probably give that track a 9 out of 10. I absolutely loved doing Forever. It was such an enjoyable experience, especially to listen to in the studio. It was just, in general, it was just great. Now, the last collab track to this date is the Ghost God remix by Dragon Tree. So I basically asked him if he wanted to remix one of my tracks. He came back to me a little while later with some versions of Ghost God. We spoke a lot more about this one because there was a lot more that I wanted to change for my benefit, and actually it was so much better than the original Rush remix. Not just because I gave him the stems, but as I said, because we just communicated a lot more, and we generally made a lot more changes that we were both able to agree on. So I probably give this one a 9 out of 10. It's not very often you see dubstep on my channel, but this had so much energy, and we both really liked the cover art as well. So I basically took the Ghost God YouTube cover art and just changed it a little bit to have his name. But also, whenever I change the cover art for collaborations, I do try and change the colours a little bit so it makes it more recognisable as a collaboration. So you can look at Ghost God, you can look at the Ghost God cover art and see that it's green. You'll say, oh, that's the green one, that means it must be Dragon Tree remix, for example. I would probably give that track a 9 out of 10. It was mixed really well. It was a lot better than the original Rush remix, and it was just great. So yeah, that's all the collab tracks that I've done so far. However, there is a track that I'm going to be releasing after this podcast, and it is called SoundCloud Wannabe. I'm going to leave a very, very brief preview at the end of the podcast, and it's a collab track that I've done with Flo and VP the Mac. It's my first 3-way collab. It's a hip-hop track. We're all singing / rapping, and I'm very, very excited to release it. So I'm really, really looking forward to that, and I'm really hoping you guys are going to help support me with that as well, because it actually took a lot longer than I expected because of just that's how it is when it comes to collaborations. They can take a long time, and communication can be a bit off sometimes. But it was like, that's all, like, that doesn't matter, because when it's finished, the final product is just great. So I'm also working on 2 other collab tracks at the moment. One is called Don't Need, and it's with an artist called Lisa. So she's basically doing the vocals for that, and I'm kind of producing the track. It's a sort of pop, I want to say EDM, but it's not really EDM. It's a sort of pop, sort of like a Nicki Minaj super bass sort of style. That sort of genre, I guess you could call it. But I'm looking forward to that. That's nearly done. And then the other track I'm doing is called Wild Night, which is a house track again. So I'm doing another house track, but this time it has Lisa's vocals in it. This is probably the first house track that I've done to feature somebody else's vocals in. So yeah, so that's going to come soon, and that's pretty much all of the collab tracks that we've done in the past. I've enjoyed doing all of them. They can all, they all have their own improvements, but hopefully I've covered enough of that in the podcast. And yeah, so I don't know what I'm going to be talking about in the next podcast, but we will, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And then at some point, I'm going to try and feature some guests in these podcasts. So yeah, that's going to be it for today, guys. So thanks everybody for watching. Bye.